Dallas ran for 13 years, and during that time, tragedy struck the cast again and again, almost in step with the show's biggest storylines. Jim Davis' final season. Production on Dallas kept rolling while Jim Davis was getting weaker from cancer. Viewers first met him in 1978 as Jock Ewing, the hard-Ewing patriarch in a Stetson and boots. He had spent decades in westerns before that job, so the role fit easily. Early seasons put Jock at the center of big decisions at Southfork. He backed J.R. in business fights, scolded Bobby when deals went soft, and tried to keep the family in line at the table. Then the crew began to work around a serious diagnosis. Multiple myeloma, a blood cancer, was eating away at his strength. Scripts started to change. Jock appeared sitting more, walking less, or was only heard off-screen. Lines got shorter. Scenes moved to hospital rooms and offices so Davis could manage the work. Writers sent Jock on long business trips while doctors tried to slow the disease. Reports later confirmed the diagnosis came while he was still working on the series. Filming days grew harder. Co-stars later said the veteran actor stayed professional and kept his sense of humor. Cameras could not hide the weight loss or the strain on his face. By early 1981, it was clear he could not continue on the set. Jim Davis died on the 26th of April, 1981 at home in Northridge, California. He was 71. Donna Reed, short stint. Casting news in 1984 surprised Dallas fans. Producers hired Donna Reed to take over the role of Miss Ellie after Barbara Bel Geddes left for heart surgery. Reed was already a major name in television and film. She had an Oscar for From Here to Eternity and a loyal audience from The Donna Reed Show. Joining Dallas looked like a big return to prime time. Her version of Miss Ellie felt calmer and softer in scenes at Southfork. Viewers saw a different style in key family talks. Reed played the mother figure with a steady voice, careful pauses, and a warm tone. Filming moved at a normal pace, and Reed settled into the cast during the 1984 to 1985 season. Trouble started when Bel Geddes recovered faster than expected. Producers wanted the original Miss Ellie back. In early 1985, they informed Reed that she would be replaced. Reed pushed back and filed a lawsuit for breach of contract. Reports at the time stated her deal guaranteed multiple years, not a single season. Court filings and press coverage showed tense talks behind closed doors. The case never went to trial. It ended with a settlement worth more than $1 million, according to news reports. Reed stayed out of the show after that point and did not return for any later appearances. Health concerns emerged soon after. Reed received a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer in late 1985. Friends and family said the illness progressed quickly. Treatment did not slow the disease. Donna Reed died on the 14th of January, 1986 in Beverly Hills at age 64. Keenan Wynn as Digger Barnes. Casting directors did not need to guess with Keenan Wynn. By the late 1970s, he had already logged decades as a busy character actor in films and television. When Dallas needed a new Digger Barnes for ongoing stories, he stepped into a role viewers already knew from the earlier episodes. His first Dallas scenes as Digger arrived in the second season. The character was no longer just a figure from the past. Wynn played him in the present day, older, bitter, and worn down by years of bad choices. Episodes showed Digger struggling with alcohol, money problems, and a long history of resentment. Work on the set moved steadily. Wynn hit marks, delivered lines with a rough, lived-in voice, and kept the focus on Digger's frustration with the Ewing family. His scenes with Cliff and Pam brought a different energy, since he played a father who knew he had failed but did not like being reminded of it. The performance fit the tone of late 1970s primetime drama. After his Dallas run, Wynn returned to other television and film jobs. Guest roles kept him visible, from crime shows to comedies. Behind the scenes, health began to slide. Reports later confirmed a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. Treatment had limited results. On the 14th of October, 1986, Keenan Wynn died in Brentwood, California at age 70. Tom Fuccello as Dave Culver. Viewers first met Senator Dave Culver during the early years of Dallas. Tom Fuccello had already worked in daytime dramas and films before landing the part. The show placed Culver in Austin and Washington, a politician who crossed paths with the Ewing family in business and personal life. Scenes often paired him with Donna, played by Susan Howard. Their marriage brought government decisions into Southfork debates. Culver weighed oil interests, public image, and voter concerns. It gave Fuccello a steady mix of committee rooms, party scenes, and private arguments. His performance stayed low-key but firm, the kind of senator who smiled for cameras and asked hard questions in private. Work did not stop with Dallas. Fuccello kept acting in television, movies, and series through the early 1980s. Industry reports at the time showed a solid career rather than a headline name, which fit his background as a reliable supporting actor. Health problems appeared in the early 1990s. Press coverage after his death confirmed that Fuccello was living with AIDS. Treatment options in that era were limited, and many performers kept diagnoses private. By 1993, his condition worsened. Tom Fuccello died on the 16th of August, 1993 in Van Nuys, California. He was 56. Dak Rambo's public fight. Tabloid readers in the 1970s knew the name Dak Rambo. Casting agents knew him even better. He worked his way through guest spots and soap roles before landing on Dallas as Jack Ewing, the good-looking nephew who arrived in the mid-1980s. Jack's story added a new branch to the Ewing family tree. Episodes showed him in oil deals, tense family talks, and romantic subplots. The character slid between ally and wildcard, which gave the writers room to move him across business and personal drama. Rambo handled that mix with a relaxed style which fit the primetime slot. Off-camera, life was rougher. Interviews years later described a period of heavy drinking and prescription drug misuse. Work stayed steady, but the pressure and lifestyle wore him down. By the early 1990s, he was on another daytime series, still working long days on set. In 1991, he received news that changed everything. Rambo was told he was HIV positive. At a time when most actors kept silent, he went public. He left his soap role, stepped back from acting, and spoke in interviews about living with the virus and the fear around AIDS. The decision made him one of the few primetime veterans to discuss the illness openly. Health declined over the next few years. Treatments in that period were limited and hard on the body. On the 21st of March, 1994, Dak Rambo died in Delano, California at age 52 from complications related to AIDS. David Wayne starts Digger's story. Earlier viewers of Dallas met a different Digger Barnes. Before Keenan Wynn, the part belonged to David Wayne, a veteran actor with strong stage and film credits. Producers brought him in for the early episodes to ground the Barnes side of the story. His Digger appeared mostly in scenes that looked backward. Flashbacks and key talks filled in how the Barnes and Ewing families broke apart. Wayne played Digger as a man still carrying old wounds, angry at missed chances, and convinced the Ewings had stolen everything. It gave depth to the conflict that later drove Cliff and Pam. The work fit his range. Wayne had already earned awards and respect for theater and movies. Dallas was another job, but the role linked him to a new generation of television fans. After those early episodes, producers moved the part in a different direction, and his run ended. Wayne returned to other projects. He made features, television, movies, and guest appearances through the 1980s. Age and health slowly caught up with him. Public reports later confirmed a diagnosis of lung cancer. Treatment did not stop the disease. On the 9th of February, 1995, David Wayne died in Santa Monica, California at age 81 from complications of lung cancer. Howard Keel, late resurgence. Movie fans in the 1950s knew Howard Keel for big MGM musicals. He sang in films like Showboat and Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and toured with concert shows when that era faded. Work slowed during the 1960s and 1970s, and he moved more into stage and nightclub work. Dallas changed that path. In 1981, producers cast him as Clayton Farlow, the strong ranch owner tied to Sue Ellen. At first, Clayton was a guest presence. Scenes placed him on the Southern Cross Ranch and intense talks with J.R. and the rest of the Ewings. Viewers saw a calm older man who could stand his ground against J.R. without raising his voice. Storyline shifted quickly. Clayton's bond with Miss Ellie grew, and the character moved from the edges of the plot toward the center. Marriage to Miss Ellie pulled him right into Southfork life. For Keel, that meant regular screen time again, steady pay, and a new group of fans who had never seen the old musicals. The show also sparked an unexpected music revival. British audiences in particular embraced him. He released albums of classic standards and played sold-out concerts in the United Kingdom. Interviews from that time show a performer who felt lucky to have a second wave so late in life. Health issues appeared in the early 2000s. Reports noted treatment for colon cancer and periods of weakness. On the 7th of November, 2004, Howard Keel died at his home in Palm Desert, California. He was 85. Barbara Bel Geddes, quiet exit. Stage audiences knew Barbara Bel Geddes long before television viewers did. She built a career in New York theater, earned major awards, and also worked in films. When Dallas launched, producers wanted someone steady to play the Ewing matriarch. She fit that need and joined the cast as Miss Ellie. From the pilot onward, Miss Ellie gave the show a calm center. Scenes often cut to her in the kitchen, on the porch, or in the living room, trying to steady Jock, J.R., and Bobby. Bel Geddes used small gestures and a soft voice to sell those moments. That presence made her one of the most trusted figures on the series. Health problems did not start with Dallas. She had a radical mastectomy in the early 1970s. Later, during the run of the show, she faced serious heart trouble. Surgery in 1983 forced her to step away while she recovered. Producers brought in Donna Reed for a season, then invited Bel Geddes back when doctors cleared her. After returning, she stayed for several more years of episodes. By 1990, she chose to retire from the role and from large television projects. Life shifted to her homes in Maine and New York. She wrote children's books, worked on art, and kept out of regular press attention. In August 2005, news outlets reported that Barbara Bel Geddes had died of lung cancer at her home in Northeast Harbor, Maine. She was 82. Larry Hagman, long health fight. Off-screen, Larry Hagman liked to push limits. He was the son of Broadway star Mary Martin and started out on stage in smaller television roles. In the 1960s, he became a familiar face as the astronaut on I Dream of Jeannie. That sitcom success set him up for what came next. Dallas turned him into one of the most famous TV villains on Earth. From 1978 onward, he played J.R. Ewing, the ruthless oil man viewers loved to hate. Ratings exploded around the Who Shot J.R. storyline in 1980. Interviews from that time show Hagman leaning into the fame, happy to be the bad guy in a cowboy hat. Behind the scenes, alcohol was a constant. He drank heavily for years. Doctors later told him he had serious liver damage. By 1995, the situation reached a breaking point. Hagman received a liver transplant. The surgery saved his life and forced a change in habits. After that, he spoke in public about drinking, recovery, and organ donation. Work kept rolling. He took guest roles, appeared at fan events, and stayed linked to Dallas. When a cable revival moved forward in 2012, he signed on to play JR again. During filming, he learned he had cancer. Statements at the time named it as a form of leukemia. He kept working while getting treatment, with production adjusting scenes around his health. On the 23rd of November 2012, Larry Hagman died in Dallas, Texas, at age 81. George Kennedy, final big role. By the time George Kennedy showed up on Dallas, he already had an Oscar on his shelf. He served in the United States Army, worked as a technical advisor, then built a long career as a character actor. His Academy Award came for Cool Hand Luke in 1967, where he played Dragline. Dallas brought him into late 1980s primetime. He joined as Carter McKay, a tough rancher and executive with ties to Westar. Early episodes put him at odds with the Ewings over land, water rights, and business control. Kennedy played McKay with a steady stare and a voice that never needed to rise to feel threatening. Plots later moved him into formal corporate battles. McKay sat in boardrooms, signed deals, and made life hard for JR and Bobby. The role used Kennedy's physical presence and his calm delivery. It was a different space from chain gangs and war films, but it kept him in front of a wide television audience. Away from Dallas, he kept working in movies and on television. Credits included comedies like the Naked Gun series and guest spots on network shows. He moved to Idaho in his later years, living with family and stepping back from regular production schedules. Reports in his final period mentioned heart problems and general age-related decline. On the 28th of February 2016, George Kennedy died at age 91. Jared Martin as Dusty. Some viewers first spotted Jared Martin in science fiction roles. He worked on shows like The Fantastic Journey and later starred in the 1980s War of the Worlds series. His break on Dallas came earlier, when producers needed a romantic rival who could pull Sue Ellen away from Southfork pressure. Dusty Farlow entered the story with horses, rodeo fame, and confidence that stood apart from the Ewing world. Scenes built a bond between Sue Ellen and Dusty that pushed JR into jealous rage. Writers soon added a major twist. A reported plane crash sent Dusty off the map. Fans thought he was gone for good. Months later, episodes revealed he had survived. The character returned in a wheelchair, setting up emotional confrontations and shifting the tone of Sue Ellen's storyline. Martin played those moments with calm delivery and steady eye contact. Viewers saw a quieter alternative to JR, which raised the stakes for family loyalty. His time on Dallas moved in and out through the early 1980s. Once the story arc closed, Martin shifted toward work behind the camera. He directed projects, taught film, and co-founded a youth media program in Philadelphia that trained students in production skills. Interviews from that period show a focus on teaching and community work rather than chasing another primetime role. Health issues developed later. News reports confirmed a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. Treatment did not stop the disease. On the 24th of May, 2017, Jared Martin died in Philadelphia at age 75. Morgan Woodward, as Punk. Casting directors often turned to Morgan Woodward when they needed a strong presence. He built a long resume in westerns and action shows, with guest roles on major network series. By the time Dallas hired him, he was already familiar to fans of tough television characters. He appeared on Dallas as Marvin Punk Anderson, a close friend of Jock and Miss Ellie. Punk moved easily between ranch life and oil business circles. Episodes placed him at barbecue tables, boardroom meetings, and community events. His voice carried weight in family talks, especially when tempers rose among the Ewings. Woodward's steady style made Punk more than a background figure. When Jock died, Punk helped fill the older male space in family scenes. He offered advice, shared stories, and served as a bridge between the past and the current Southfork fights. Viewers accepted him as a trusted ally, not just a business contact. Work outside, Dallas continued. Woodward kept booking roles on television, including parts in crime dramas and genre shows. His earlier Star Trek appearances stayed popular in fan circles. As the years passed, he stepped back from acting and lived a quieter life in California. Reports in early 2019 confirmed his death on the 22nd of February in Hollywood Hills. He was 93. Ken Kercheval steps in. Tabloid stories were not the reason people knew Ken Kercheval. Stage critics were. He trained for theater, worked on Broadway, and earned solid notice in New York before television pulled him in. Producers of Dallas needed someone who could play legal strategy and personal frustration without turning every scene loud. Kercheval fit that need. Cliff Barnes entered the series as the rival who never quite won. Episodes showed him chasing deals, filing lawsuits, and trying to beat JR at every turn. The feud pushed plots forward and gave Kercheval steady screen time. He delivered tight lines with a tense smile, which made Cliff both sympathetic and stubborn. It became one of the most reliable sparks in primetime drama. Work never stopped while the show ran. Kercheval accepted film roles, guest spots, and stage projects between seasons. Around the mid-1990s, health became a concern. Reports confirmed a diagnosis of lung cancer. Surgeons removed part of a lung, and he returned to work after recovery, a move that surprised many in the industry. Decades after the original run, interest in Dallas returned. News of a cable revival reached him, and he signed on for a short arc in 2012. The older version of Cliff carried more anger and confidence, which gave longtime fans a new look at the character. In April 2019, reports from Indiana confirmed his death from pneumonia at age 83. Alice Hirson, steady support. Casting teams often called Alice Hirson when they needed a believable mother or neighbor. She worked on soap operas, sitcoms, and dramas long before Dallas came along. Her resume included shows like The Edge of Night, and later an early role on a sitcom led by Ellen DeGeneres. Dallas introduced her as Mavis Anderson, married to Punk Anderson. Mavis appeared in social settings, charity events, and quiet talks with Miss Ellie. She gave scenes a softer balance when business or family tension climbed. Hirson did not push for spotlight moments. Instead, she held the tone steady when large conflicts needed a pause. After Dallas, she stayed active in television. Casting directors continued to hire her for family roles. Interviews pointed to a reliable career rather than a pursuit of fame. She worked on projects through the 1990s and early 2000s, then stepped back from regular production. Later years were spent at the motion picture and television retirement community. Friends and colleagues visited, and news items occasionally mentioned her long television run. Health concerns grew with age. Press reports confirmed her death on the 14th of February, 2025 at age 95, with natural causes cited. Priscilla Pointer, long career. Industry insiders knew Priscilla Pointer as part of a family of actors. Her daughter, Amy Irving, earned major film roles, but Pointer built a long career of her own. She started in theater, worked on television during the 1960s, and appeared in notable films such as Carrie in the 1970s. Dallas added another chapter. Pointer joined the cast as Rebecca Barnes Wentworth, mother to Cliff, Pamela, and Catherine. Her arrival shifted the family structure. Scenes showed Rebecca returning after years away, bringing money, business, power, and emotional turmoil. The character altered alliances and fueled new disputes. Pointer continued to work after her Dallas run. She appeared in films, guest roles, and stage projects. Reporters noted her steady output and the respect she held among peers. Public interest followed her family links, but she kept attention on her own work. Age did not stop her, but she stepped back from acting in later years. She lived in Connecticut and stayed close to family. On the 28th of April, 2025, she died at age 100. Imagine if Kim Kardashian suddenly vanished from the spotlight. No money, no followers, no influence. That's exactly what happened to Anita Ekberg. She was the original Hollywood it girl, and when Hollywood was done with her, they erased her like she never existed. Swedish beauty in the spotlight. Kirsten Anita Marianne Ekberg wasn't dreaming of Hollywood. Born in 1931 in Malmö, Sweden, she was the sixth of 8 children in a working-class family. Acting wasn't on the radar. Pageants? Not really. But standing nearly 5 feet 7 inches with striking blue eyes and an hourglass figure, she stood out. At 18, she entered Miss Sweden and won. The title came with an unexpected ticket to the Miss Universe pageant in America. She didn't take home the crown, but that didn't matter. Her real prize was catching the attention of Universal Pictures. The studio saw potential, or more accurately, they saw a blonde bombshell they could mold into the next Hollywood sensation. A contract landed in front of her. No experience? No problem. Hollywood had a system for that. Once she arrived in Los Angeles, the real work began. English lessons, voice coaching, acting classes, every major studio had a formula to create a star. But learning lines wasn't the priority. Publicity was. Universal plastered her in magazines, setting up glamorous photo shoots that emphasized her figure. The iceberg, as some called her, was their answer to Marilyn Monroe, except colder, more unattainable. She was sent to premieres, mingling with A-listers to build an image before she even had a real role. These stunts worked. The press couldn't get enough of her. But inside the studio, there was a problem. Universal didn't know what to do with her. The first film appearances were blink and you'll miss it moments. Background roles, arm candy, nameless eye candy. The studio gave her a handful of minor parts, but never a real chance. It didn't take long for them to decide she lacks acting potential. 6 months in, Universal dropped her. For most Hollywood newcomers, that would have been the end. A plane ticket back to Sweden. A forgotten name in a pile of failed starlets. But Anita Ekberg wasn't done. Instead of retreating, she leaned into modeling, covers of magazines, pin-up photos that flew off newsstands. Peter Gowland, a top photographer, made her a staple of the 1950s pin-up scene. That gamble paid off. These images caught the eye of John Wayne. He cast her in Blood Alley, 1955. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Suddenly, Hollywood took another look. Paramount Pictures came calling. This time, it wasn't just for press shots. Anita Ekberg was back in the game. Finding a place in Hollywood. Hollywood had rules. If you were a blonde bombshell in the 1950s, you had 2 paths. You could be the next Marilyn Monroe, or you could be forgotten. Anita Ekberg wasn't about to let the second one happen. After a brief role in Blood Alley, 1955, Paramount Pictures took a chance on her. They didn't see an actress. They saw an asset. Their mission? Sell her as Hollywood's next big thing. The studio had a formula for stardom. It wasn't about talent. It was about image. Ekberg was sent to glitzy Hollywood parties, strategically placed next to the biggest names in the business. Photo shoots were arranged, plastering her across fan magazines. Studio publicists fed stories to gossip columns, painting her as a dazzling newcomer. Everything was designed to make her a household name before she even had a real career. Ekberg was placed in big-budget films alongside major stars, not as the lead, but as the distraction. In War and Peace, 1956, she played a glamorous aristocrat opposite Audrey Hepburn and Henry Fonda. The film was a massive production, but Ekberg's role, pure decoration. Then came Hollywood or Bust, 1956, a comedy with Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. The title was ironic, because for her, this was a make-or-break moment. She had the looks, the presence, but could she act? Studios weren't convinced. Critics weren't either. The press described her as decorative. The message was clear. She was there to be looked at, not taken seriously. Despite that, she wasn't going unnoticed. Famed columnist Walter Winchell called her the most perfectly constructed blonde ever. Directors kept casting her, but always in roles that didn't require depth. By the late 1950s, her on-screen image as a sex symbol started overshadowing her career. She was featured in countless pin-up spreads, labeled as one of Hollywood's most desirable women. Fans loved it. Casting agents? Not so much. Meanwhile, European actresses like Sophia Loren were proving their versatility. They played dramatic roles, showed range, and built lasting careers. Loren had been cast in challenging roles that showed depth, proving she was more than just a beauty. Ekberg, on the other hand, was still Hollywood's go-to exotic blonde. She tried breaking the mold, took roles in Paris Holiday, 1958, with Bob Hope, hoping comedy would give her a fresh start. But the industry had already made up its mind. She was a face, not a talent. By the late 1950s, her Hollywood career was stalling. Paramount had promoted her, used her, but never truly invested in her. She wasn't being offered the roles that made a career last. The industry was shifting. Studios were looking for more than just a pretty face. The new wave of actresses, Elizabeth Taylor, Shirley MacLaine, and even young newcomers like Jane Fonda, were proving they could be more than just beautiful. Ekberg, despite her fame, was being left behind. She was famous. But fame wasn't translating into respect. She needed something big, something to make Hollywood take her seriously. Then, in 1960, Federico Fellini called. Everything was about to change. A career in limbo. By 1960, Hollywood had given up on Anita Ekberg. She was famous but not respected, glamorous but not essential. Then Federico Fellini saw something others didn't. The Italian director was preparing a film that would redefine cinema. La Dolce Vita wasn't a traditional Hollywood production. It was stylish, provocative, and unlike anything Ekberg had done before. Fellini didn't just want a blonde bombshell, he wanted an icon. The role of Sylvia wasn't complex. She was a famous actress, desired by everyone, but truly known by no one. Ekberg didn't need to act much. She just had to be Sylvia. Then came the Trevi Fountain scene. Filming took place on a freezing winter night in Rome. Ekberg, draped in a flowing black gown, stepped into the cold waters of the Trevi Fountain, calling to Marcello Mastroianni. She was hypnotic, ethereal, a living fantasy. Mastroianni, struggling through the cold, reportedly had to wear a wetsuit under his tuxedo just to endure the temperature. Ekberg? She didn't flinch. She moved through the water as if she were made for it. The scene was electric. Even Pope John XXIII reportedly criticized it for being immoral. That only made it more famous. When La Dolce Vita premiered, it was an instant phenomenon. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It shocked audiences, outraged censors, and redefined European cinema. Ekberg became the face of it all. The press couldn't stop talking about her. The Trevi Fountain scene turned her into a global symbol of beauty and mystery. But there was a catch. The role that made her immortal also typecast her forever. Directors didn't see a rising actress. They saw a fantasy. Producers weren't offering complex scripts. They wanted Sylvia. Fellini remained a fan. He cast her in Boccaccio 70, 1962, and later The Clowns, 1970. But outside of Italy, the phone stopped ringing. Hollywood turns its back on her. After La Dolce Vita, Anita Ekberg had everything: fame, international recognition, and a defining cinematic moment. But none of it translated into what she wanted most: a serious Hollywood career. The industry had already made up its mind. She wasn't a leading lady. She was an image. She returned to the U.S., hoping her European success would change things. It didn't. Studios still saw her as a one-note star. No challenging roles, no career reinvention, just more offers to play the blonde bombshell. Sophia Loren was getting dramatic roles. Brigitte Bardot was proving herself as more than a pinup. Even Marilyn Monroe, despite her struggles, had a legacy Hollywood was invested in. Ekberg? She was trapped. She landed a role in Four for Texas, 1963, starring alongside Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. On paper, it looked like a comeback. In reality, she was just window dressing. It was the same story with Woman Times 7, 1967, an anthology film featuring Shirley MacLaine, a decent cast, a well-known director, but Ekberg's presence barely mattered. Meanwhile, Hollywood was changing. The 60s ushered in a new era. Sex symbols weren't enough anymore. Actresses had to be versatile. Studios wanted stars who could carry a film, not just decorate it. Younger faces were taking over. Jane Fonda, Faye Dunaway, Raquel Welch, actresses who blended beauty with depth. Ekberg was left behind. Hollywood had shut the door, and she never found a way to reopen it. A tumultuous love life. Anita Ekberg's name was in the press as much for her personal life as for her movies. The tabloids loved her. And Hollywood? Not in a good way. Her beauty made her irresistible to the world's most powerful men. Actors, singers, billionaires. She was linked to them all. The rumors started with Frank Sinatra. He had a thing for glamorous blondes, and she fit the bill. Were they serious? Probably not. But the press made sure everyone thought so. Then came Tyrone Power, one of Hollywood's biggest leading men. They were seen together just before he died suddenly in 1958. Whether they were truly involved is up for debate, but Ekberg's name was in every headline. Then there was Gianni Agnelli, the heir to the Fiat empire. He had a reputation for seducing Hollywood's most stunning women, and Ekberg was one of them. Italian newspapers loved their supposed affair, adding fuel to her growing status as Europe's most talked-about actress. But her most chaotic relationship was with Anthony Steele. A British actor, Steele was once poised for stardom. Then he met Ekberg. Instead of being Hollywood's next power couple, they became tabloid gold, for all the wrong reasons. Steele had a drinking problem, and a jealousy problem, and a temper. The fights were legendary. One night, he allegedly destroyed their home in a drunken rage. Another time, he accused her of cheating in public, making a scene at a glamorous party. Despite the drama, they married in 1956. It lasted 3 years. By the time the divorce was finalized in 1959, Steele's career was over. Ekberg's was still alive, but barely. Even after her marriage ended, she stayed a favorite target for the press. By the 1960s, her film career was slowing down, but the tabloids weren't done with her. Rumors swirled that she had an affair with Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi of Iran. Some claimed she had been secretly invited to his palace. She denied everything. Whether true or not, her reputation was now built on scandal, not talent. And in Hollywood, that was a problem. Directors wanted actresses who took their careers seriously, not ones making headlines for their personal lives. Desperate attempts to stay relevant. Hollywood had shut Anita out. Europe still gave her work, but the roles weren't meaningful. She was famous, but fame wasn't getting her anywhere. Directors weren't casting her in serious films. Instead, she was booked for forgettable projects, low-budget comedies, action films, and movies that existed to show off her looks rather than her talent. In 1963, she starred in 4 for Texas alongside Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. On paper, it seemed like a solid opportunity, big stars, a mainstream Hollywood production, but her role was just another sexy distraction. She was still playing the same one-dimensional bombshell characters Hollywood had always given her. A few years later, she appeared in Woman x 7, 1967, an ensemble film led by Shirley MacLaine. It was a respectable project with an acclaimed director, Vittorio De Sica, but Ekberg's part was small. A decade earlier, she had been treated as a rising star. Now, she was barely making an impact. Meanwhile, the industry was moving on. Hollywood was no longer obsessed with glamorous European bombshells. The 1970s ushered in a new era of filmmaking, gritty, realistic, and socially conscious. Women like Jane Fonda, Faye Dunaway, and Ellen Burstyn were leading blockbusters, not just looking good in them. Ekberg was stuck in the past. Desperate to keep her career alive, she returned to Italy. It seemed like a smart move. After all, La Dolce Vita had made her an icon there, but even Italy wasn't the same anymore. The golden era of extravagant, glamorous European cinema was fading. Realism and political storytelling were taking over. Directors were casting women with depth and versatility, and Ekberg's name wasn't on the list. She reunited with Federico Fellini for The Clowns, 1970. It should have been a big deal. But the film wasn't a success,
and Ekberg's role was minor. She was a shadow of what she once was. More minor European films followed. She worked steadily, but the films were low budget and forgettable. By the 1980s, things were getting worse. The offers slowed to a trickle. When she did get cast, it was in B-movies. She appeared in low-quality Italian productions and forgettable roles that barely played outside of Europe. She had once been the face of European cinema. Now she was just a familiar name clinging to an industry that had moved on. By the 1990s, her film career was barely alive. There were no major directors calling, no starring roles, no career revival. Instead, she made random appearances in small projects, often playing exaggerated versions of herself, a guest spot on an Italian TV show, a cameo in a film few people watched. The glamour was gone. Even Federico Fellini, her biggest supporter, passed away in 1993. With him, the last real connection to her golden years was gone. It was clear her career was over, but instead of stepping away gracefully, she kept taking whatever she could get. A woman who had once worked with Hollywood's biggest names was now appearing in direct-to-video flops. By the time the 2000s arrived, the work had dried up completely. There were no big comebacks, no second chances, no reinvention. Ekberg had been one of the most famous women in the world. Now she was barely a footnote in Hollywood history. Financial ruin and personal hardships. For decades, she had lived like the fortune would never dry up. Lavish homes, extravagant shopping sprees, five-star hotels, she never held back. Unlike other stars who invested wisely or built second careers, she spent without caution. She had never imagined a life where the film offers stopped. But they did. Hollywood had already abandoned her, and Europe was no longer paying her bills. By the 1990s, the financial trouble turned into a full-blown crisis. She had no steady income, no savings, and no fallback plan. Then came the Italian tax authorities. In 1999, she was accused of owing nearly $350,000 in unpaid taxes. She denied it, calling the claims exaggerated, but the legal battle dragged on for years. The penalties kept growing, the stress piled up. Whatever little money she had left was disappearing fast. Then, in 2004, disaster struck again. While she was away, burglars broke into her villa outside of Rome. They took everything: jewelry, furniture, valuables, even personal keepsakes from her Hollywood days. The few remnants of her once glamorous life were gone in an instant. She later claimed the thieves were people she trusted, maybe former employees, maybe old acquaintances. But by then, it didn't matter. The damage was done. With no career, no major assets, and no way to recover financially, she was forced to downsize her life completely. Her beloved villa, where she had lived for decades, was repossessed. She had no choice but to move into a modest home outside of Rome. The woman who had once graced magazine covers, red carpets, and exclusive parties was now struggling just to keep a roof over her head. But she never admitted defeat. Even when the press caught glimpses of her in later years, heavier, older, no longer the bombshell, she still carried herself like a star. She refused to beg for money, refused to sell her story to tabloids. When asked about her financial struggles, she shrugged it off, saying, "I have lived, I have loved, I have had adventures." But behind closed doors, the reality was grim. Health problems were piling up: diabetes, arthritis, chronic pain. The years of indulgence and excess had caught up with her. By the late 2000s, she was barely able to walk. But she didn't want pity. She refused to ask for help, even when she needed it. Then, in 2011, disaster struck again. A bad fall left her with a fractured hip and femur. The injury ended her independence completely. She was now confined to a wheelchair, reliant on others for basic needs. Medical bills piled up, money was running out. In one of her final interviews, she admitted she had no family to rely on, no financial safety net. She was living in a modest care home outside Rome, surviving on a small pension. She had once ruled the silver screen. Now she was alone, forgotten, and barely getting by. The fall had taken her mobility, but Hollywood had taken everything else. How Hollywood forgot Anita Ekberg. Anita Ekberg's name was barely mentioned in Hollywood. Her face was still immortalized in La Dolce Vita, but the woman herself? She was forgotten. No industry tributes, no retrospectives, just a fading memory of a time when she had been everywhere. In 2011, after her crippling fall left her wheelchair-bound, she made one final plea for help. She reached out to the Fellini Foundation hoping for financial assistance. The response? Silence. The same industry that once paraded her around like a goddess had left her to fend for herself. Meanwhile, her contemporaries, Sophia Loren, Brigitte Bardot, even Marilyn Monroe's legacy, were still celebrated. Their films were studied, their careers honored. Ekberg? She had no such revival. On January 11, 2015, at 83 years old, she passed away in a small clinic in Italy. The cause? Complications from long-term illnesses. There was no Hollywood send-off, no major tributes, just a brief news cycle mention before the world moved on. Even in death, she was overshadowed. Her passing came days before the Oscars, an event where Hollywood celebrates itself. Not a single mention of her that night. The industry that once built her up had erased her like she was never there. Meanwhile, La Dolce Vita remained a cinematic masterpiece. The Trevi Fountain scene still graced film school lectures and pop culture discussions, but Ekberg's role in it was often reduced to a visual, not a performance. Critics credited Fellini for the scene's magic. Some argued Marcello Mastroianni's reaction was what made it work. Ekberg was just there. That's how Hollywood remembered her. Not as an actress, but as a beautiful image frozen in time. Unlike her peers, she never reinvented herself. Never became a producer, director, or industry powerhouse. She let Hollywood define her.
Today's celebrities get canceled over a tweet. Back then, these Golden Age icons got away with lawsuits, arrests, and full-blown cover-ups and still showed up to award shows like royalty. Errol Flynn defined morality laws. By the early 1940s, his reputation was out of control. Women, booze, and bar fights followed him everywhere. But in 1942, things got serious. He was accused of misconduct with 2 minors, a scandal that could have ended anyone else's career. Flynn didn't panic. He leaned into the spotlight. At trial, his legal team turned the courtroom into a circus. Fans camped outside. Reporters hung on every detail. Flynn smirked through it all, cracking jokes and signing autographs between breaks. He swore it was all lies. His defense claimed the girls were after money and fame. The jury believed him, or just didn't care. He walked out a free man. After the trial, he kept working like nothing happened. Warner Brothers stood by him. His next film hit theaters months later. The Scandal barely touched his career. That's when Hollywood realized something. Flynn was bulletproof. He once bragged, "I like my whiskey old and my women young." No one made him take it back. The phrase followed him for years, and he didn't mind. What should have ended his career only made him more infamous. He wasn't humbled. He doubled down. For the rest of the decade, he coasted on charm, controversy, and sheer arrogance. And the system let him. Bette Davis fought Warner Brothers. In 1936, Davis went to war with her own studio. Warner Brothers kept giving her weak scripts, one after another. She called them junk, and she was done playing window dressing in bad films. So she walked. Then she sued. Bette left for England and tried to work overseas, even though she was still under contract. She hoped a British court would let her break free. That didn't happen. Warner Brothers won the case, and Davis had to crawl back to Hollywood. She was broke, embarrassed, and technically in the wrong. But here's the twist. She still got what she wanted. Instead of punishing her, Jack Warner gave her better roles. Within a few years, she won her second Oscar for Jezebel. By 1942, she was the highest-paid woman in America. That lawsuit, it didn't hurt her. It made her iconic. She didn't just stand up for herself. She made a scene and then made history. On set, she demanded top billing, script approval, and even lighting control. She fought directors. She fired agents. She knew she was hard to work with, and she leaned into it. Clark Gable refused military duty. When World War II broke out, plenty of stars rushed to enlist. Jimmy Stewart signed up. So did Henry Fonda. But Clark Gable held off. At 41, he said he was too old. MGM wanted to keep him working, and he agreed. At first, the public let it slide. Gable had just lost his wife, Carol Lombard, in a plane crash while she was on a war bond tour. People gave him space, but then they didn't. Headlines started asking why the King of Hollywood wasn't in uniform. Stewart was flying combat missions. Gable was still filming. Under pressure, he finally enlisted in the Army Air Forces in August 1942. He went through training and even flew a few missions over Europe. But let's be honest, he was protected. Crews cleared the way. Commanders made sure he stayed safe. He narrated recruiting films and posed for photos in uniform. Gable was promoted to major in less than a year. Officially, he earned it. Unofficially, his fame helped. He served, yes, but not like the rest. After the war, the public forgave him. Hollywood welcomed him back with open arms. But those early months left a mark. He had waited. He hadn't rushed in like the others, and no one really forgot that. Joan Crawford, blackballed directors. By the late 1940s, her career was on a hot streak again, thanks to Mildred Pierce. That role earned her an Oscar. It also gave her more power than ever, and she used it without apology. On set, Crawford demanded custom lighting, last-minute rewrites, and approval over her co-stars. She kept a mirror near the camera to check her angles mid-scene. Directors who pushed back were iced out. She once had a cinematographer replaced because she didn't like how her cheekbones looked. Behind the scenes, she took notes on who crossed her. One director called her the toughest dame in the business. Another refused to work with her ever again. She didn't care. If a man had done the same, she claimed he'd be called brilliant. Crawford didn't just want control, she expected it. She studied scripts obsessively, annotated every page, and rehearsed alone under harsh lights to perfect her image. It wasn't about the role. It was about staying on top. Eventually, the studios stopped fighting her. They gave in. For years, she could get people fired with a phone call. Her enemies called her ruthless. Her fans called her unstoppable. But the industry never forgot how hard she was to manage. As she aged, the roles dried up. Directors passed. Producers hesitated. By the 1960s, Crawford was still a name, but no longer a threat. John Barrymore drank on set. By the 1940s, Barrymore wasn't just acting drunk. He was drunk. All the time. Once called the greatest stage actor of his generation, Barrymore had turned into a walking headline. Studios didn't drop him right away. He was still a Barrymore. But by 1940, his drinking had spiraled. On the set of Playmates, his last film, he couldn't remember lines. Crew members wrote cue cards and hid them all over the set. He'd stumble through scenes, reading from behind props, furniture, and even other actors. He made jokes about it. So did the press. People laughed, but no one was fooled. Barrymore was fading, and fast. Directors tried to work around him. Editors pieced together scenes like puzzles, but the truth was clear. He wasn't performing anymore. He was just showing up. He once said, "My only regret in life is that I didn't drink more champagne." That line stuck with people. It sounded charming. But behind it was a man no one could control. Studios still cast him out of habit. Audiences still showed up. At first. But eventually, even they stopped laughing. Barrymore died in 1942. He was 60. By then, his reputation had turned into a cautionary tale. Marlene Dietrich controlled her image. She never let anyone decide how she looked, ever. By the late 1940s, she had built a brand on mystery, beauty, and control. Studios might have paid the bills, but Dietrich ran the show. On every set, she brought her own lighting expert. Not to light the scene, just to light her face. She rejected costumes she didn't like, refused camera angles that didn't flatter. She even cut lines if she thought they didn't suit her image. She once told a director, "I make my own legend." And she did. She curated every still photo, screened every press interview, and approved how her films were edited. If her cheekbones weren't highlighted just right, reshoot. It wasn't just vanity, but strategy. Dietrich understood the power of visuals long before Instagram. She knew one bad angle could kill a career, so she never gave anyone the chance. Studios gave up fighting her. They let her do it her way because her films made money, and audiences were hypnotized. The smirk, the cigarette, the tailored suits, none of it was accidental. Other actresses followed rules. Dietrich rewrote them. Humphrey Bogart mocked studio heads. He didn't care what studio bosses thought. By 1950, he was one of the biggest stars in the world, and he acted like it. He called producers idiots, walked out of meetings, and openly mocked executives who tried to push him around. Warner Brothers didn't fire him. They needed him. After The Maltese Falcon and Casablanca, he was a box office guarantee, and he knew it. Bogart was one of the first actors to break out of the studio system. He hated the way they treated talent like property, so he fought back. He argued over scripts, swapped lines, and pushed back on casting choices. He even formed his own production company, Santana Productions, just so he could make the movies he wanted his way. In 1949, when Warner Brothers tried to force him into another gangster role, he refused. "I'm tired of playing the guy who shoots first," he said. He held out until they offered something better. On set, he joked with crew, but if he didn't like a director, you'd know, fast. He once told one, "You direct your way, I'll act mine." He wasn't always easy to work with, but he delivered, and that's what kept him safe. Lana Turner covered a crime. In 1958, Turner's life exploded into headlines. Her teenage daughter, Cheryl, had fatally stabbed Johnny Stompanato, Lana's abusive boyfriend. The killing happened in Lana's home, right outside her bedroom. The story dominated every paper in America. But Lana, she played it calm, tearful, but controlled. She told the court Cheryl acted in self-defense. The media framed it as a tragic domestic story. But behind the scenes, things looked messier. Stompanato was a known mob enforcer. He had threatened Lana repeatedly. Friends said she tried to end it, but he wouldn't go. When he showed up during a fight and Cheryl stabbed him, Lana made sure the story stayed on the daughter. The coroner ruled it justifiable homicide. No charges were filed. Lana walked free, and her daughter did too. But not everyone believed it was that simple. The studios jumped into crisis mode. MGM scrambled to manage PR. Lana's career was on the line, but instead of sinking, she bounced back. A year later, she starred in Imitation of Life, which became one of the biggest hits of her career. People whispered, "Did Lana protect Cheryl or take the fall for something else?" No one knows for sure, but she stayed famous. She stayed booked, and she never answered questions that made her uncomfortable. Montgomery Clift ignored doctors. He was supposed to be the next big thing. By the early 1950s, he was Hollywood's sensitive rebel, good looks, raw talent, and a quiet intensity directors loved. Then came 1956. One night, after leaving a party at Elizabeth Taylor's house, Clift crashed his car into a telephone pole. The wreck nearly killed him. His jaw was shattered. His face was never the same. Doctors warned him to take a long break, rest, heal, let the swelling go down. Clift refused. He rushed back to finish filming Raintree County, even though his face didn't match earlier scenes. You can see the difference on screen before and after the crash. From there, things got worse. He relied on painkillers, alcohol, and sheer willpower to keep working. He couldn't turn his head easily. His speech changed, but he didn't slow down. He acted like nothing had changed. Directors adapted. Crews shot him in shadow. Editors worked around his injuries. Everyone tried to help, but only up to a point. The damage was physical, emotional, and visible. He became unpredictable on set, sometimes brilliant, sometimes lost. Cliff didn't want pity. He didn't want limits. He believed he could act through anything. For a while, he did. But by the early 60s, his career stalled. His body gave out before his talent ever did. Frank Sinatra versus photographers. He didn't like being told what to do, especially not by the press. By the 1950s, he was one of the most famous men in America and one of the most volatile. If a photographer got too close, he lashed out. He broke cameras. He threw punches. He once had his bodyguards beat up a reporter who printed something he didn't like. Lawsuits followed. So did more headlines, but none of it stuck. Sinatra had friends in high places, politicians, lawyers, even mob figures. Rumors swirled about how much protection he really had. He denied everything, of course, and somehow it always blew over. Rumors circulated in 1957. A Look magazine photographer tried to snap a shot at a party. Sinatra grabbed the man by the collar and knocked the camera to the ground. No charges, no apology. Just more swagger, turned his temper into part of the brand. Old Blue Eyes wasn't just a nickname, it was a warning. You didn't cross him unless you were ready for the fallout. Studios didn't drop him. TV shows still booked him. He even won an Oscar for From Here to Eternity, proving that charm and talent still beat bad behavior. Judy Garland misperformances. She had the voice, the face, and the audience in the palm of her hand. But by the 1960s, she couldn't stay on stage long enough to finish a show. Years of studio pressure, pills, and emotional trauma had taken a toll. MGM started her on a certain pill as a teen to keep her awake during filming. Later, they gave her sleeping pills to knock her out. That cycle never stopped. By her 30s, she was struggling. On tour, she showed up late, or not at all. She forgot lyrics, slurred lines, or broke down mid-song. Fans still adored her. Venues still booked her. But every show was a gamble. In 1961, she made a stunning comeback at Carnegie Hall. The album became a classic, but even that high didn't last. Within 2 years, she was back to missed gigs and canceled concerts. Promoters warned venues. Co-stars crossed their fingers. She once told a reporter, "I'm always being Judy Garland. I'll never get to be just me." That pressure crushed her. Studios stopped calling. Television networks pulled back, but the public stayed obsessed. People wanted to save her or watch her fall. Sometimes both. She was still box office gold, but only if she showed up. That didn't always happen. Marlon Brando rewrote scripts on set. By the 1960s, Brando didn't follow scripts, but rewrote them. Literally. Directors would hand him a screenplay, and he'd toss half of it out. Sometimes he'd rewrite lines the night before. Sometimes on set. He refused rehearsals, changed blocking, delayed shoots. Brando didn't care. He was Marlon Brando. On Mutiny on the Bounty, he drove the entire production over budget and behind schedule. The crew resented him. Co-stars avoided him. But studios couldn't stop him. He was still bankable. He spoke in whispers during scenes, forcing sound teams to scramble. He demanded cue cards off camera when he didn't want to memorize lines. On The Godfather, he wouldn't even learn his dialogue. They taped it to nearby furniture. When a director objected, he shrugged. "I'll give you what I give you." And the thing was, when it worked, it really worked. Brando won Oscars, broke acting norms, and changed Hollywood. He knew it too. That made him harder to control. He refused press junkets, showed up late, insulted interviewers. But producers kept hiring him because he brought something no one else could. He once told an actor, "The only reason I'm in this business is because I haven't found anything else to do." That attitude defined him. Brilliant, unpredictable, and always in charge. Elizabeth Taylor demanded Vatican apology. In 1963, Taylor caused an international scandal and didn't flinch. While filming Cleopatra, she started an affair with co-star Richard Burton. The problem? Both were married to other people. Paparazzi caught them sneaking around in Italy. The world lost it. The Vatican's newspaper branded her with a scathing label implying moral indecency. Harsh words, especially from the Catholic Church. Most stars would have apologized. Taylor didn't. She fired back and demanded a retraction. She never got one, but it didn't stop her. The affair only made her more famous. Crowds followed her in every city. Magazines couldn't get enough. Studios panicked about Cleopatra, which was already over budget and behind schedule. But Taylor wasn't going anywhere. She became the highest-paid actress of her time, earning $1 million for one movie. She showed up late, fought with directors, and demanded rewrites. One producer called the shoot a slow, expensive disaster. Still, Cleopatra premiered. It bombed at first, but Taylor didn't. She married Burton, then divorced, then married him again. It became its own show. Taylor had gone from child star to tabloid queen, and she leaned into it. Warren Beatty refused to be edited. In 1967, Beatty didn't just star in Bonnie and Clyde, he produced it, and he controlled everything. Casting, shooting schedule, final cut. When the studio tried to re-edit the film, he threatened to walk. They backed down. Beatty was only 30, but already had a reputation. He'd rewrite scenes the night before, argue with directors, delay production until he got what he wanted. On Bonnie and Clyde, he clashed with almost everyone. But he also had the vision to see what the studio didn't. The film was revolutionary. Warner Brothers hated the first cut. They thought it was too violent, too weird, and wouldn't sell. Beatty disagreed. He fought for it, hard. He screened it himself, pushed critics to watch. When Time magazine gave it a glowing review, the tide turned. Suddenly, Beatty looked like a genius. The film became a hit. It got 10 Oscar nominations, and Beatty got credit for all of it. From then on, he expected control. He didn't just want roles. He wanted ownership. He took over every set he worked on, often slowing productions down to a crawl. But he didn't care. The final product mattered more. Katharine Hepburn banned interviews. By the 1970s, Hepburn was Hollywood royalty, and she acted like it. She stopped doing interviews, refused press tours, dodged award shows. If someone wanted a quote, she ignored them. If a reporter caught her off guard, she walked away. Studios didn't push her. They knew better. She made her own schedule, picked her roles, controlled her image. No manager, no press agent, no one speaking on her behalf. She once told a journalist, "I welcome opinions, but I don't listen to them." That about summed it up. For decades, she refused to play the game. And it worked. She kept getting roles, even as she aged out of the parts other actresses were begging for. She had a record, 4 Oscars, and she never showed up to accept a single one. People called her difficult. She called it freedom. Directors worked around her. Studios cleared her path. Younger stars respected her or feared her. She wore pants before it was fashionable. Cut her hair short when others were doing pin curls. She did what she wanted, always. By the time the media caught up, it was too late. Hepburn had built a career without ever giving herself away.
You've been scammed. Hollywood didn't just sell you movies, it sold you fake lives, scripted love stories, and actors pretending to be people they never were. Fake identities. Hollywood isn't just about make-believe on screen. For decades, studios controlled every detail of their stars' lives, including their names, ages, and backgrounds. If someone didn't fit the perfect Hollywood mold, they were remade from the ground up. Take Rita Hayworth. She was born Margarita Cancino, but Columbia Pictures thought her name and dark hair were too foreign. The fix? A painful makeover. Her hairline was raised through electrolysis, her hair was dyed red, and just like that, a brand new star was born. Rock Hudson was never really Rock Hudson. His real name was Roy Harold Scherer Jr., but his agent, Henry Wilson, wanted something stronger, more masculine. The studio also erased details about his personal life, making sure the public saw only the leading man fantasy. Jean Harlow's birth year? Faked. Studios made her younger to fit their narrative. Judy Garland's image as the girl next door? A total illusion. Behind the scenes, MGM forced her onto a brutal diet of pills to keep her thin and working long hours. Some lies went deeper. Loretta Young's supposed adoption of a child? That was actually her own daughter, secretly born after an affair with Clark Gable, but Hollywood couldn't let that scandal go public, so they crafted a fake adoption story. Back then, if an actor didn't fit the perfect Hollywood fantasy, they got rewritten. Didn't sound American enough? They changed your name? Didn't look the part? They forced makeovers. Had a personal life that didn't match their image? That was buried. Studios weren't just making movies. They were building illusions, selling audiences a fantasy both on screen and off. And if a star didn't play along, they could kiss their career goodbye. Fake Hollywood love stories. Hollywood didn't just rewrite backgrounds, it scripted relationships too. If a star's real love life didn't fit their image, studios stepped in and fixed it. Rock Hudson was America's heartthrob, but the studio couldn't let fans know he was gay, so they staged a quickie marriage with Phyllis Gates, his agent's secretary. The press ate it up, and Hudson kept his leading man status. Judy Garland had her own love life controlled by MGM. The studio forced her into relationships that looked good in magazines, including a publicized romance with Mickey Rooney. It wasn't real, but it sold tickets. Jean Harlow was known as the ultimate bombshell, so when she got involved with Paul Byrne, a much older MGM executive, the studio promoted it as a great love story. But 2 months after their wedding, Byrne died in what was officially ruled a suicide. Hollywood went into damage control, spinning the story to protect Harlow's reputation. Even Tab Hunter, another closeted actor, was given fake girlfriends like Natalie Wood to keep up appearances. The press played along, reporting on dates that never actually happened. And then there was Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher. Hollywood sold them as the perfect couple, young, in love, and America's sweethearts. But when Fisher left Reynolds for Elizabeth Taylor, the public was outraged. The studios scrambled, painting Reynolds as the wronged woman and Taylor as the villain, though the truth was far more complicated. For decades, Hollywood ran a matchmaking machine, not for love but for headlines. Stars were paired off, breakups were staged, and entire marriages were set up just to control public perception. The wholesome stars with dark secrets. Hollywood loves a good clean-cut image, but behind the smiles and staged interviews, some of its biggest stars had secrets the studios worked overtime to hide. Bing Crosby was the ultimate family man. At least, that's what the public saw. Off-screen, his son later described him as a strict and sometimes violent father. The studios kept that part quiet, making sure audiences only saw the charming crooner. Fred Astaire was sold as the gentleman of dance, but many of his co-stars didn't see him that way. He was known for his brutal perfectionism and sometimes treated his dance partners harshly. The truth didn't fit his brand, so Hollywood kept it out of sight. Then there was Joan Crawford, the elegant leading lady. While she dazzled on screen, her adopted daughter, Christina, later exposed the truth in Mommy Dearest, a book that described Crawford's behind-the-scenes temper and alleged abuse. The studios, of course, had always portrayed her as a loving mother. Walt Disney built an empire on family-friendly entertainment, but his personal relationships with employees and his views on unions weren't as magical. His company projected an image of warmth and creativity while quietly silencing critics. Even Lucille Ball, America's comedy sweetheart, had her share of secrets. Studios worked to downplay her brief involvement with the Communist Party to keep her out of scandal. Had the public known at the time, it could have ended her career. Hollywood had a formula: market the actors as perfect, erase anything that didn't fit, and make sure the press played along. If a star had a bad reputation, it was buried. If they had a scandal, it was covered up. And if they ever spoke out about the industry's control, they were replaced. Actors who faked their stunts. Hollywood loves to sell the idea that its biggest stars are fearless, throwing punches, jumping off buildings, and pulling off impossible stunts. But the truth? Many of them never even came close. John Wayne, the tough guy cowboy, wasn't as rugged as his movies made him seem. In reality, he avoided dangerous stunts, relying on doubles for fight scenes, horseback riding, and almost anything risky. Yakima Canutt, one of Hollywood's best stuntmen, did many of Wayne's most famous action sequences, including the legendary stagecoach stunt in Stagecoach 1939. Even classic swashbucklers like Errol Flynn needed help. He played fearless adventurers, but during intense sword fights and dangerous leaps, it was usually a double in costume. Studios covered it up because his image as a dashing hero had to stay intact. Then there's Charlton Heston, best known for Ben-Hur, 1959. That incredible chariot race? Most of it was done by stuntman Joe Canutt, who even got injured during a fall that audiences assumed was Heston himself. Fast forward to modern Hollywood, and the myth continues. Tom Cruise is famous for doing his own stunts, and while he really does take risks, he still has doubles for specific shots. The does everything himself story is great for marketing, but the truth is more complicated. Some stars didn't even try to fake it. Drew Barrymore admitted she didn't do a single stunt in Charlie's Angels. It was all professionals in wigs. And in The Fast and the Furious, Paul Walker and Vin Diesel had stunt doubles for most high-risk scenes, despite the franchise's tough guy branding. Hollywood thrives on illusion, and stunts are no different. If an actor's reputation relies on them being a fearless action star, studios will do whatever it takes to keep that fantasy alive. The reality? While the credits roll, the real heroes, the stunt doubles, walk away without the applause. Performances. Hollywood manipulated. Not every legendary performance was the result of raw talent. Sometimes actors were coached, pressured, or even tricked into delivering unforgettable moments. And in some cases, what you saw on screen wasn't even them. Take Shelley Duvall in The Shining, 1980. Her terrified breakdowns weren't just great acting. Director Stanley Kubrick psychologically tormented her for months to get the reaction he wanted. He isolated her from the cast, made her redo scenes over 100 times, and caused so much stress that her hair started falling out. The result? An iconic performance, but at a massive personal cost. Then there's Tippi Hedren in The Birds, 1963. Her final scene, where birds attack her, was completely real. Director Alfred Hitchcock promised mechanical birds, but then threw live ones at her, day after day. Hedren was scratched, pecked, and left emotionally wrecked. The terror, you see? It wasn't acting, it was survival. And sometimes, performances were literally replaced. Audrey Hepburn charmed audiences in My Fair Lady, 1964, but that breathtaking singing voice? Not hers. The studio hired Marni Nixon to dub nearly every song. Hepburn only found out after filming, and she was furious. Even in modern Hollywood, manipulation happens. Leonardo DiCaprio's raw pain in Django Unchained, 2012, after smashing a glass? That was real. He actually cut his hand mid-scene but kept acting, so director Quentin Tarantino used it. Some actors were coached to perfection. Marlon Brando struggled with lines in The Godfather, 1972, so cue cards were placed around the set to guide him. That legendary performance? Half of it was reading off hidden scripts. Hollywood sells us the idea of pure, effortless talent. But the truth? Many great performances were manipulated, forced, or even faked. And if an actor didn't deliver, the director made sure they had no choice. Actors who didn't deserve their Oscars. Winning an Oscar is supposed to be the ultimate proof of an actor's talent, but sometimes those golden statues weren't earned. They were bought, stolen, or given for the wrong reasons. Take Elizabeth Taylor's Best Actress win for Butterfield 8, 1960. Even she hated the movie, calling it a piece of garbage. But after she was hospitalized with pneumonia, almost dying, the Academy handed her the award out of sympathy. The performance wasn't her best, but Hollywood loves a comeback story. Then there's Al Pacino. He finally won an Oscar for Scent of a Woman, 1992, but many believe it was just a makeup win for all the times he had been snubbed before. His performances in The Godfather, Serpico, and Dog Day Afternoon were legendary, yet he lost every time. By 1992, the Academy owed him one. And sometimes actors didn't even do the heavy lifting for their award-winning performances. Marlon Brando won Best Actor for The Godfather, 1972, but he refused the award and sent Native American activist Sacheen Littlefeather to reject it in protest. His win became more about politics than the performance itself. John Wayne finally won an Oscar for True Grit, 1969, but most critics agreed it was more of a career award than a performance award. The Academy often gives Oscars not for the best work, but for the best timing. And let's not forget Shakespeare in Love, 1998, beating Saving Private Ryan for Best Picture. It wasn't talent that won, it was an aggressive campaign by producer Harvey Weinstein, who spent millions on marketing and swayed voters with expensive dinners and gifts. Oscars are supposed to reward the best, but behind the scenes, politics, timing, and industry favors play just as big a role as actual talent. If you thought the best performance always won, Hollywood has been lying to you again. The age lies. Hollywood keeps selling. Hollywood has a long history of lying about ages, shaving off years, adding a few, or straight up rewriting birth records. Why? Because in the film industry, age isn't just a number, it's a marketing tool. Doris Day was one of the biggest stars of the 1950s, but for decades, no one knew her real age. She believed she was born in 1924, but when she turned 95, public records revealed she was actually born in 1922. Even she had been fooled by the lie Hollywood created. Jessica Chastain kept her real birth year hidden for years, refusing to confirm how old she was. Why? Because actresses often get pushed out of lead roles once they hit a certain age. When she finally admitted she was born in 1977, fans were shocked. Hollywood had made her seem much younger. Mila Kunis had to lie in the opposite direction. She auditioned for That 70s Show at 14 years old, but because the casting call required actors to be 18, she told producers she would be turning 18 soon. Technically true, but also completely misleading. And then there's Rebel Wilson, who built her career on a larger-than-life persona but kept her birth year a mystery. It wasn't until an old classmate leaked her records that the truth came out. She was several years older than she had claimed. Age manipulation wasn't just for women. Cary Grant and Clark Gable had their ages adjusted early in their careers to make them seem younger. Meanwhile, some actors like Steve McQueen were aged up to make them appear more mature and leading man ready. So when you hear about a young rising star or a veteran actor who's still in their prime, take it with a grain of salt, because the numbers Hollywood gives you aren't always real. Actors Hollywood made look talented. Hollywood has spent decades convincing audiences that certain actors are naturally gifted, but behind the scenes, many relied on tricks, stand-ins, and a whole lot of editing to appear more skilled than they actually were. Take Marilyn Monroe, one of the most famous actresses in history, but on set, she struggled with basic lines, needing up to 60 takes for a single sentence. Directors had to piece together her performances from tiny clips, making her look flawless when, in reality, it was hours of frustration and retakes. Then there's Arnold Schwarzenegger. His early movies had him delivering lines with such a heavy accent that studios dubbed over his voice entirely. In his first film, Hercules in New York, 1970, another actor's voice was used because producers thought audiences wouldn't understand him. Singers weren't always who they seemed either. Natalie Wood starred in West Side Story, 1961, but her singing voice wasn't hers. It was dubbed by Marnie Nixon, who secretly sang for several major Hollywood actresses. Deborah Kerr in The King and I, also dubbed. Even Bruce Lee, a martial arts legend, didn't always perform his fight scenes in real time. In some films, his movements were too fast for cameras to capture properly, so editors had to slow them down. Meanwhile, his famous fight sounds? They were often added in post-production to enhance the effect. Some actors couldn't even dance. Jennifer Beals, who played the lead in Flashdance, 1983, barely did any of the dancing herself. A double did the hard moves, and careful editing made it look seamless. So, the next time you're blown away by an actor's incredible talent, ask yourself, how much of it was actually real? The truth about method acting. Dedication. Method acting is often sold as the ultimate mark of dedication. You've heard the stories, actors staying in character 24/7, pushing their bodies to the limit, and suffering for their craft. But here's the truth, a lot of it is just marketing. Take Jared Leto. He made headlines for sending used condoms and dead rats to his Suicide Squad 2016 co-stars to stay in character as the Joker. But when the movie came out, he had barely 10 minutes of screen time. The extreme behavior? Mostly hype. Christian Bale is famous for his drastic body transformations, losing 60 pounds for The Machinist, 2004, then bulking up for Batman Begins, 2005. Impressive? Absolutely. But was it necessary? Some argue no, especially since Hollywood has makeup, prosthetics, and CGI that could achieve the same effect safely. Daniel Day-Lewis is often called the king of method acting, but his dedication sometimes went too far. For My Left Foot, 1989, he refused to leave his wheelchair on set, making crew members carry him everywhere. For Gangs of New York, 2002, he caught pneumonia because he refused to wear modern winter clothes on set. His commitment was real, but at what cost? Meanwhile, Leonardo DiCaprio's infamous The Revenant, 2015 role involved eating raw bison liver and sleeping inside a dead animal carcass. It made for a great story, but the actual film could have been just as convincing without it. And let's talk about Robert De Niro, who gained 60 pounds for Raging Bull, 1980. While impressive, actors like Meryl Streep and Anthony Hopkins have argued that real skill comes from acting, not extreme physical changes. Hollywood loves method acting stories because they make performances sound more impressive. But behind the scenes, many of these so-called dedicated transformations are overhyped, unnecessary, and sometimes just PR stunts. Real talent isn't about starving yourself or staying in character for months. It's about delivering a great performance without making everyone suffer for it. Stars who faked their retirement. Hollywood is full of dramatic exits, big stars announcing they're done with the industry, only to pop up in another movie a few years later. Retirement in Hollywood is often just another publicity stunt. Take Daniel Day-Lewis. In 2017, he made a grand exit, declaring Phantom Thread would be his final film. But this wasn't his first retirement. He quit acting before, only to return in the 90s. Fans still wonder if he'll be back again. Steven Soderbergh, director of Ocean's 11 and Magic Mike, announced he was done with filmmaking in 2013. His reason? Hollywood was too exhausting. But within a few years, he was directing Logan Lucky, 2017, and jumping right back into the business. So much for retirement. Then there's Jay-Z, who held a massive farewell concert in 2003 and announced his retirement from music. The industry mourned. Then, in 2006, he dropped a new album like nothing happened. Turns out the retirement was just a great marketing move. Cher is the queen of fake retirements. In 2002, she embarked on her farewell tour, telling fans this was the last time they'd ever see her perform. That tour lasted 3 years. Then, in 2014, she went back on the road. By 2018, she had yet another tour. At this point, fans expect her to retire every few years. Actors don't just retire for dramatic effect. Sometimes it's damage control. Nicolas Cage claimed he was done with major Hollywood movies after years of bad roles. Then, after Pig, 2021 earned critical praise. He walked back his statement. Suddenly, he wasn't done anymore. Hollywood retirements rarely stick. They create hype, nostalgia, and ticket sales. And when the money's right, the retired star suddenly finds a reason to return.
The year was 1943. A film sat locked in vaults too scandalous for theaters. At the center, a woman lying in hay rewriting what was allowed on screen. This wasn't Monroe or Gardner. It was Jane Russell, and her story only gets wilder from here. The bra that launched a legend. The Outlaw wasn't supposed to be a scandal. It was a low-budget Western by Howard Hughes, starring a newcomer named Jane Russell. But Hughes had something bigger in mind. He didn't just want a movie, he wanted shock value. Russell was only 21, with no major roles behind her. Hughes cast her as Rhea McDonald, a sultry saloon girl. During filming, he became obsessed with how her figure appeared on screen. Costumes didn't give him the look he wanted, so he built his own solution, a new kind of bra. Metal rods, wiring, and padding were sewn into a custom design meant to lift her bust unnaturally high. Hughes even filed a patent for it. Jane hated it. "That thing hurt like hell," she said years later. "I threw it in the trash and wore my own." Despite that, Hughes told the press she wore his invention. He wanted the story to spread, and it did. Then came the haystack photo. A publicity still showed Russell reclining in hay, blouse barely holding on. No moviegoers cared about the plot. They wanted to see that image. Theaters received angry letters. Religious groups protested. One censorship board called the photo morally dangerous. The production code refused to approve the movie. Hughes had a plan. He sent fake protest letters to theaters claiming outrage from concerned citizens. It worked. Curious crowds showed up in droves. The limited release in 1943 was chaos. In New York and Los Angeles, people lined up for blocks. In some cities, police were called to manage traffic. Chicago shut the film down mid-run. Jane Russell had barely opened her mouth on screen, but her image was already burned into American culture. The Outlaw didn't make her a star because of her acting. It made her a symbol of everything Hollywood was afraid to show. The full nationwide release didn't happen until 1946. By then, she didn't need it. She was already the most talked about woman in Hollywood. And she had done it without saying a word. Headlines, contracts, and control. After The Outlaw stirred controversy in 1943, Jane Russell's name never left the papers, but behind the headlines, she was caught in a mess of studio politics, lawsuits, and image control. She hadn't asked for any of it. Howard Hughes had her locked under an exclusive contract. That meant no other studio could touch her, and she couldn't choose her roles. She later said, "I was stuck doing whatever he wanted. I couldn't even accept better parts." For years, Hughes refused to loan her out, even when major studios begged. Warner Brothers, MGM, and Paramount all showed interest. Hughes said no. During that time, Jane wasn't making movies. Instead, she was doing press, magazine covers, pin-up shoots, public appearances. It was all meant to keep her famous without ever stepping on set. She became one of the most photographed women in America without releasing a single new film. Then came the court battles. Film censors still tried to block The Outlaw from playing nationwide. Hughes fought back with everything he had, lawyers, appeals, even threats to pull his other films from theaters. Jane stayed quiet in public but admitted later she hated the circus. "I wanted to act, not pose for ads." In 1946, the film finally got wide release. It made millions. Critics weren't kind. Most called the acting wooden and the story dull. But it didn't matter. People came to see her. Hughes had turned Jane into a brand, not an actress. Finally, in 1947, Jane got a new project, Young Widow. It was her first non-Hughes production. The script had depth, and she was eager to prove she could act. But the damage had been done. Audiences still saw her as the Hey Girl. Reviews were mixed. Some praised her presence. Others said she was stiff. She later admitted she was still learning. Still, she wasn't going away. The public had decided Jane Russell was worth watching, even if no one could agree on why. For better or worse, her image had already outgrown the screen. And Hughes? He still wasn't done pulling the strings. Jane versus Hollywood. By 1948, Jane Russell was trapped between fame and frustration. She was known everywhere, but barely working. Hughes continued to control her roles and turn down outside offers. She started to push back. Hughes offered her a part in The Paleface, a comedy western with Bob Hope. Jane didn't think she could do comedy, but she said yes just to get back in front of a camera. It turned out to be a smart move. The film was a hit. Audiences loved her timing, and critics admitted she held her own next to Hope. It was the first time she got to show range. But things weren't smooth behind the scenes. Jane had no power over her career choices. Hughes micromanaged every decision. He approved costumes, scripts, even haircuts. Jane called him obsessed with control. She began quietly asking her lawyers for a way out of the contract. Meanwhile, gossip columns tracked her every move. She was photographed constantly but rarely quoted. Journalists described her as cool, hard to read, and aloof. In truth, she was tired of being treated like a mannequin. Her public image was sex symbol. In private, she was religious, blunt, and preferred quiet. In 1949, she shot The Big Steal with Robert Mitchum. The production was rushed because Mitchum had just been arrested for marijuana possession. The studio needed good press fast. Jane agreed to the project on short notice. It was a basic crime story, but again, she handled it well. Mitchum later said, Jane was tougher than anyone gave her credit for. She wanted more like that, less glamour, more grit. But Hughes still had her locked down. In 1950, she publicly clashed with studio heads over the roles she was being offered. She turned down several scripts and refused to pose for certain publicity shots. That made her difficult in Hollywood terms. Jane wasn't playing along anymore. She wanted to act, not sell. And slowly, people were starting to listen. The pinup girl had found her voice, and she was just getting warmed up. Diamonds, blondes, and a stolen show. In 1953, Jane Russell landed what should have been a supporting role. Instead, she nearly stole the film. The movie? Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Her co-star? Marilyn Monroe. Monroe played the sweet, flirty Lorelei. Jane played Dorothy, the sharp brunette who called the shots. On paper, Marilyn was the lead. But on screen, Jane dominated scene after scene. Her timing was cleaner. Her delivery was drier. Her attitude? Unshakable. Most people don't know this. Jane didn't want to do it at first. She thought the musical numbers were silly, but the studio pushed her in, and once filming started, she didn't hold back. She handled her own vocals, danced in heels, and rewrote parts of her dialogue. Monroe had more screen time, but Jane had more control. Crew members said Russell often calmed Marilyn down between takes. She reportedly helped block scenes and guided Monroe through complex shots. Then came the premiere drama. Here's the rumor. Monroe refused to attend the Blondes premiere in Hollywood, so Jane showed up alone and played both roles on the red carpet. She even signed Monroe's name for fans. Reporters called her a total pro and said she carried the night without breaking a sweat. The movie became a global hit. Jane's performance was praised for being grounded and funny, while Marilyn got the attention for her beauty. But behind the scenes, even executives said Jane held the film together. She never bragged about it. In interviews, she gave Monroe credit and avoided drama. But those who worked on the film knew the truth. Jane was the adult in the room. She showed up on time, knew her lines, and never cracked under pressure. That role cemented her as more than a body or a photo. She could act, she could command, and she could outshine a legend without even trying. Hollywood had underestimated her again, but this time everyone saw what she could really do, and Jane didn't need hay or headlines to prove it. The Hollywood Bowl baptism. In 1954, Jane Russell shocked fans again, but this time it had nothing to do with movies or costumes. She stepped into the waters of the Hollywood Bowl in front of thousands and got baptized. It wasn't a publicity stunt. Jane had always kept her faith private. She was raised in a deeply religious home and read the Bible daily. But the tension between her image and her values was growing. After years of posing in tight gowns and playing bombshell roles, she wanted to make a statement. That statement came during a Billy Graham revival event. The massive crowd watched as Jane walked into the water and was fully submerged. It made headlines the next morning. "Movie siren gets saved," one paper wrote. Others called it a mid-career pivot, but Jane didn't care. After that, she became more vocal about her beliefs. She gave interviews criticizing the moral direction of Hollywood. She said too many films celebrated sin and called some of her past work foolish. She even started a group called WAIF, World Adoption International Fund, combining her faith and advocacy. This turn confused people. She was still doing movies and still dressing glamorously, but now she was talking about Jesus on talk shows. Some fans loved it, others tuned out. The industry didn't know how to handle her shift. She didn't back down. In public speeches, she warned young actors to stay grounded and avoid the fast track to ruin. In private, she mentored struggling performers behind the scenes. But not everyone supported her. Some Hollywood insiders mocked her open faith. She was accused of being judgmental and old-fashioned. Producers called her unpredictable. Studios didn't know if she'd promote a film or preach at the premiere. Jane didn't care. She wasn't asking for approval anymore. The woman once labeled too hot for theaters was now talking about redemption and doing it on her own terms. And while the cameras rolled on others, Jane rewrote her own script in real life. Fight with the church. After several miscarriages, she decided to adopt, but adoption in the 1950s wasn't simple, especially across borders. Her first adopted son, Tommy, came from Ireland. The process took over a year. Jane grew frustrated with red tape and church politics. She believed too many kids were stuck in orphanages while paperwork dragged on. In interviews, she called the system heartless and said it cared more about rules than children. So she took matters into her own hands. In one case, she flew overseas, met with the child's caretakers, and returned with the baby before full approval. She claimed it was legal under emergency conditions. Authorities disagreed. The press labeled it baby smuggling. Jane called it saving a life. That incident pushed her to create WAIF, the World Adoption International Fund. It helped connect orphans with families worldwide. Jane used her fame to pressure lawmakers and raise money. She testified in front of Congress and worked with embassies to change regulations. But the backlash was real. Catholic leaders in Ireland accused her of undermining church-run orphanages. One priest called her reckless and self-righteous. Jane fired back, saying the church cared more about control than compassion. Despite the criticism, she expanded her work. WAIF helped place hundreds of children in homes during its peak. Jane personally reviewed applications and even helped pay travel costs for some families. She wasn't just a spokesperson, she was hands-on. This wasn't the Hollywood work people expected from a screen siren, but Jane didn't care about expectations. She said, "If I'd waited for the world's approval, I'd still be posing in hay." Her house in California became a hub for her causes. Her kids lived outside the spotlight, and she rarely talked about them publicly. But in her later interviews, she called them her greatest work. The roles in film paid the bills. The work in adoption, she said, saved her soul. Russell versus feminism. In an era when women's liberation was gaining momentum, Jane took the opposite path, and she made sure everyone knew it. She called second-wave feminism a mess of angry women yelling about problems they created. In one 1,973 interview, she said, "I don't know what they're fighting for. I never had to fight for anything." That quote alone set off a storm. Talk show hosts loved booking her. She clashed with feminist guests and stood her ground, even when audiences booed. She argued that women already had power but were wasting it on resentment. "I've worked with men my whole life," she said. "I never needed to burn my bra to get respect." Her words drew backlash. Gloria Steinem's supporters called her outdated. Some women's groups urged sponsors to drop her from endorsements. But Russell didn't flinch. She said modern feminists misunderstood strength. Strength isn't about shouting. It's about knowing who you are. She also attacked Hollywood for portraying women as helpless victims or hypersexualized cliches. Ironically, critics pointed out that her early roles did exactly that. Jane didn't deny it, but said the problem wasn't the image. It was the intention behind it. By this time, she was focused on her religious activism and charity work, but her conservative takes made headlines more than her advocacy. She called Roe v. Wade a mistake and said America needed less therapy and more churches. She wasn't trying to please anyone. The feminist movement saw her as a relic. Her fans saw her as fearless. Either way, she stayed visible. While other actresses her age faded quietly, Jane Russell kept showing up, louder, bolder, and completely unwilling to change. Love her or hate her, she refused to play the part anyone handed her. At 60 and still breaking rules. In the 1980s, most actresses from Jane Russell's era were long retired, not Jane. At 60, she signed a national ad deal to model Playtex bras. The ads ran on television, in magazines, and in stores across America. Most women her age were expected to disappear from the spotlight, but Jane showed up in full glam, pitching support bras to real women. The tagline, "Does your bra have to show your age?" Jane didn't think so. Critics rolled their eyes. She didn't care. "I wore bras before most of these ad execs were born," she joked in an interview. "I know what works." And she meant it. The campaign was a hit. Sales spiked, especially among older women who saw her as relatable, not ridiculous. But this comeback wasn't just about ads. She started making more public appearances again. Church groups, charity galas, even morning talk shows. She wasn't doing movies, but she wasn't fading away either. She found a way to stay in front of the public without pretending to be younger than she was. And she wasn't afraid to call out ageism. When a reporter asked if she'd consider a comeback film, she replied, "Sure, if they let me play a 60-year-old woman who acts like one." She also joked that it was the first time in her life people cared about her comfort more than her figure. Back then, it was all underwire and pain. Now it's all soft cups and scents. Took long enough. The lingerie campaign made headlines, not for shock, but for surprise. No one expected Jane Russell, the once silent symbol of scandal, to become the face of grown-up confidence. She wasn't trying to seduce anymore. She was trying to relate. And that hit harder than any bombshell act ever could. In a business that tossed women aside after 40, Jane Russell didn't just refuse to disappear. She came back in a bra and reminded the world who she was. And she did it with a wink, not an apology. Outspoken, unfiltered, and unbothered. While most Golden Age stars slipped into quiet retirement, Jane cranked up the volume. She gave interviews that often went viral, at least by pre-internet standards. On one local television segment, she called modern movies trash with sound effects. She criticized rising stars for acting like victims instead of women. One host tried to steer her back to polite conversation. Jane doubled down. She also leaned harder into politics. She identified as a proud conservative, supported prayer in schools, and spoke at several Republican events. She criticized Hollywood's moral decay and said most actors today were spoiled and spineless. These statements didn't win her new fans, but they kept her in the press. In 1999, she made headlines again for all the wrong reasons. She was arrested for driving under the influence in California. Her blood alcohol level was nearly twice the legal limit. At the time, she was in her late 70s. The tabloids pounced. "Busted bombshell," read one headline. She didn't deny it, she didn't spin it, and she definitely didn't apologize in public. Instead, she joked about it later, saying, "At my age, you're lucky to get a story printed about you, even if it's for drinking." Even when called out, she rarely backed down. In one interview, she admitted she didn't believe in political correctness. "I say what I mean, and if you don't like it, turn the channel." No apologies to the end. She passed away in 2011 at the age of 89. True to form, her final years were lived without filters, edits, or apologies. She spent her last decade mostly in Santa Maria, California, staying active in her church and speaking at local events. Neighbors described her as approachable but blunt. If you asked about her past, she'd answer, but she wouldn't sugarcoat it. She didn't do nostalgic interviews. She didn't attend retrospectives. When asked why she skipped award shows or tributes, she said, "I didn't go for applause when I was working. Why would I show up for it now?" In her final interviews, she remained firm in her views. She still rejected modern feminism, still criticized Hollywood's direction, and still defended her early work, even the parts people once called scandalous. "I gave the public what they wanted," she said, "and I did it on my own terms." She also spoke about faith until the end. Church was her real stage, and she liked it that way. She called it the only place that never asked me to be something else. When news of her death broke, the headlines were predictable. Most focused on the outlaw, the hay photo, and her body. Few highlighted her decades of charity work, her fights with censors, or the fact that she'd outlasted most of her peers. Her family didn't issue a long statement. They said she passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by loved ones. No funeral spectacle, no red carpet send-off. And that felt right, because Jane Russell never needed the spotlight. She was the kind of star who took it, then handed it back when she was done. No legacy spin, no last-minute reinvention, just one final act of doing exactly what she always had. Living loud, aging honestly, and refusing to ever play by someone else's script.